What is going on, everybody? Welcome on in to a special edition of the College Football Breakdown Show. I'm here to break down some MACtion, Wednesday MACtion. The Mac is back. Return of the Mac. Cue that song, DJ. I'm here to cover it. This is a impromptu episode. We got the election results coming in, and it's stressing me out, so I decided to hop in here and cover Wednesday's MACtion slate. So might be a little off the hip, but bear with me. Don't totally have all my notes together. All right. First game. So we got a 6-game slate here. There is a late night slate which has the latter 4 games. We have 2 games beginning Wednesday at 3 p.m. I'm on the Pacific Coast, so 6 o'clock Eastern, and then we have the other 4. Most of them begin at 4. Bowling Green in Toledo is the late one at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to cover the main one, and I'll give some thoughts on what it would do if I was playing the late game without the first 2 games. All right. First off, Western Michigan versus Akron. I'm targeting Western Michigan here. On a whole, I do think they might be a little bit overrated this year. I'm usually a fan of them. They have a pretty good offense. They usually recruit the skill positions very well. Most notably, their wide receiver transfer, Reed. He just transferred to Michigan State and has been showing out there. So usually I'm targeting them, but they lost a lot of talent this year. However, when you're playing Akron and you have the track record you do for scoring some points, then I'm going to target you. They do lose their star quarterback, John Wasink. He graduated. So in comes Caleb Ellaby at quarterback. He's at 7,000. I'm going to play him. I'm going to have some Western Michigan stacks. Their implied total is around 36. I think it's a little bit higher. They're about 22.5-point favorites. That's been rising. If you didn't know, Akron absolutely sucks. They were like 1-11 against the spread. Maybe my number's wrong, but they were like one of the worst teams of all time covering against the spread last year. They have a joke of a coach. It didn't used to be a joke of a program, but it is right now. So while they should be a little bit better, they're going to need to be a lot better for me to not stack against them. They gave up about 213 yards per game on the ground last year. Anyway, this guy Ellaby, he has started about 4 games, even though he wasn't the full-time starter, so he does have a little bit more experience than you might think, and he has some guys returning, catching passes. So I really like Ellaby at 7,000. I think so. There are a lot of really good running backs on this slate. I'm gonna have more running backs than I usually would have. I'll even run a lineup or 2 where I have 4 running backs in there. Yeah, 1 at the super flex and 1 at the flex. Because I mean it's the MAC, baby. These teams love to ground and pound. Sean Tyler at 5,800 is one of the better values on the slate at running back. This guy, I highlighted him over the preseason in the summer as a guy to target as an underrated fantasy back. These Western Michigan running backs have been fantasy gold for a while now. Most notably, Bellamy. I believe he was drafted by the Broncos, or maybe undrafted free agent, but a very talented back. He went off, and this is what Western Michigan likes to do. So Sean Tyler, while I think he will have Jackson Kincaid, the Nevada transfer, will get some carries, this is supposed to be Sean Tyler's backfield. He was listed as the starter without an or designation going into this one. If this guy Jefferson, I think, forget his first name. Let's check. Ladarius nailed it. Ladarius Jefferson transferred in from Michigan State, but last we heard he has not received his eligibility. So if he has not received word about his eligibility as a transfer yet, he probably will not hear from it by tomorrow's game. So if he does, I guess 3,300 or whatever. But anyway, Sean Taylor, this guy's a big play threat. This guy can really break some. Go watch some highlights on YouTube. This kid can scoop. And against Akron, he's going to get enough carries to do some damage. So I really like him here. I might stack him with Ellaby. I might stack any of their wide receivers. Sky Moore is their best receiver. He's a slot guy. As a freshman last year, he was very, very impressive. He had over 800 yards as a freshman. So I like him. Should be pretty good in PPR all year long. And the second option I really would go to is Eskridge. This guy did a lot of damage as a wide receiver 2 years ago in 2018, and then he switched to a running back last year. Didn't have quite as much success, but he's back to being a wide receiver where he has had a fair amount of success. He is a deep ball threat, and he has dealt with injuries in the past as well. So that's why his price is depressed, but make no mistake about it, he is one of their best skill position guys. Go check out his 2018 stats if you do not believe me. That's mainly where I'm going to be looking. Their other starting receiver should be Jalen Hall, who at 4,600 is also a fine option. But I think Ellaby, Eskridge, and Sean Tyler are three of the best options on the slate. And Moore is also a pretty good one. As far as Akron, there's not really much you want to do here. If Cato Nelson was cheaper, he is a dual threat. Maybe I'd look to him. I'm not sure Western Michigan's defense is going to be anything special. Obviously, nothing in the running game until they can prove it to me. But by far their number one wide receiving option is this guy, Nate Stewart. He actually had over 500 yards, which is way better than any of their other wide receivers last year. So Nate Stewart, I think, should be fine because they're going to be playing from behind. But, not a home run option, but it's decent. It's with a lot of the wide receivers in the MAC. It's pretty much the same thing. You have a lot of okay options, but no home run threats. So usually I'm looking to get value at the wide receiving position. Okay, let's move on. Eastern Michigan versus Kent State. Kent State has one of the better offenses in the MAC. They are priced up. In this matchup, they do lose most of their wide receivers except for Isaiah McCoy. Isaiah McCoy is probably too expensive for my taste. However, I will have some Dustin Crum. This guy is the most expensive quarterback on the slate, probably for good reason. He is a dual threat. He is a monster. He struggled versus Power 5 competition last year, but he actually took off in conference play, in MAC play last year. And if he took off against MAC play, I think he should be able to have a decent game pretty much every game this year. I think this could be a little bit of a back and forth affair. I usually like to bet on this Eastern Michigan team, but they do lose a lot of talent. They lose their quarterback, Mike Glass. They lose their running back. They lose a lot defensively. I'm not sure what to expect from Eastern Michigan. I think it could be back and forth, and I think both teams might be able to score. So in general, I don't hate a game stack. I'm going to target both sides in this game. Let's look at Kent State first. Like I said, Dustin Crum. I'm going to mostly have him, and I'm not going to even stack him that much with his dual threat ability. I could see him scoring on the ground. If you can somehow fit him with Isaiah McCoy, that's fine. I think Isaiah McCoy is the best wide receiver on the slate. But, again, he had 872 yards last year. That's good, but that's not really something you're going to want to pay up for when there are some fantastic running back options. If I am stacking, since they do lose most of their other secondary options at wide receiver, one way I might choose to look here is at this guy, Abram, at 4,200. He's listed as a starter on the depth chart, and I think he could do some damage there. Not really much interest for me at the running back position. If you are, I think Xavier Williams is going to be your guy. All right, as far as Eastern Michigan, they've been a pretty good fantasy team in the past. So Preston Hutchinson at 6,100 is underpriced. Don't hate him here, especially if you're game stacking him with Crum. He was effective when he filled in for Mike Glass. Mike Glass was if you played fantasy last year, you probably know who Mike Glass is. He was pretty good. And Preston Hutchinson was almost just as good in a few games when he stepped in for him. Keon Williams should be their top guy at 6,000. He is fine. They do have, I believe he's a freshman, this guy, Darius Boone Jr. stepping in. And Kent State's rush defense did give up 245 yards per game on the ground last year. Kent State had a very poor rush defense. So I think Boone at 5,100 is fine. He's actually not one of the four running backs I'm most interested in, but I do think he is a fantastic value and should be in your player pool, especially if you're playing multiple lineups. I will have a lot of Drummond at 4,800. This guy is Dylan Drummond. He's definitely a candidate to be somewhere on the all-MAC team performers. He actually led the team in targets with 80 last year. He had more than Keon Williams. He didn't even crack the 500-yard mark barrier, however, so that was a little bit concerning, but he's clearly their top option along with Williams, and you get a nice price saver there. So 4,800, he's one of my favorite wide receivers in that price range. Buffalo, NIU. So NIU, definitely looking to go against NIU here. But Buffalo is favored a fair amount due to that. They're opened at, what was it, something like 11. Now it's at like 13.5. So the market is right there with you. Buffalo likes to run the ball. They only threw the ball 31% of the time last year. So they should win this game, and they should be doing it on the ground. I don't really see a reason why they should need to pass the ball that much, which means their running backs are in play. The reason why I'm struggling here is because Jarrett Patterson is so expensive. I usually love to play Jarrett Patterson. He's one of the best running backs in all of college football. Does tremendous damage. He had over 300 total carries last year. He had almost 1,800 yards. He was at 17.99 on the season. Just a complete, absolute monster. So he's fine. If you're in cash, especially, I think he's fine. I personally, when I'm looking and I see 5-6 good running backs on a short slate, I don't really think I have to pay up to Patterson. But he's a monster, and he's probably, if he gets the most points of anybody on the slate, I would not be surprised. Not really interested in their quarterback. Like I said, they don't really pass the ball. And Van Treese has been very bad at times and slightly better at others. Not really in consideration. The only other place I'd look, Antonio Nunn, I do think is actually a very talented wide receiver. So while they're not throwing the ball, if they do throw the ball, it's probably going to be to Nunn. He's a target hog. He's by far their number one option. He did almost get 700 yards last year, despite them not throwing very much. And if you watch the tape, I think he looks like a very talented guy. So Nunn at 1,500 is okay. I would usually like to see more opportunities if I would look that way. And as far as Northern Illinois, that's going to be a complete fade for me. I'll probably end up betting their team total under 20.5. Not a believer in NIU. Like I said, I think they have, I saw something crazy out there. It was like 67 guys on their roster are completely new to the program. 67 of them are underclassmen, and like 50 something in the low 50s are completely new to the program. They had a ton of transfers go out of there. Their skill position guys are gone. I mean, it's a mess. They will be throwing, and they will be behind. I think Cole Tucker is their best wide receiver, so at 4,700, he's the only guy I would even consider. I think he might be okay, but yeah. All right, Ohio, Central Michigan. This is probably, if I'm watching one, this is going to be the one I watch the most of. It's the hardest for me to call. I think both of these teams are really hard to call. Ohio with Frank Solich, one of the better coaches in the MAC. Consistently, year in and year out, they're one of the better MAC programs in a conference where there's not a lot of structure. Like, anybody could win on any given year, and we see that if you go back and look at the conference champions. The conference champions are usually not even the best team in the league. It's a very weird year. It's crazy. It's the MAC. They play on weekdays. But CMU and Ohio, I think, are going to be two of the better teams. But at the same time, I don't know what to expect. At Ohio, they are losing O'Rourke, who was like their program guy for a couple of years at quarterback. And I'm not sure what to expect. For Central Michigan, they actually have a lot of factors going in their favor. They return a lot of production. And under Jim McElwain, I think they might be headed in the right direction. So quite frankly, this is a really hard one to call. The line is like 1.5 point favorite for Ohio. I have no idea who's going to win. If anything, I'd take the dog money with CMU since Ohio's breaking in a new quarterback and they're playing on the road. The over-under is set at 57.5, which is a decent total. Kobe Lewis, I will play a fair amount of Kobe Lewis. He should be taking over the number one role. This has been a very, very, very profitable backfield in the past. Even as the number 2 guy last year, he still had over 1,000 yards. He can catch the ball as well. He had 29 targets a year ago. So I think he is fantastic, a fantastic option here. This Ohio defense could be beat through the ground a year ago. As far as quarterback, I will have some interest in this guy Richardson, Daniel Richardson. I guess he's supposed to start. If David Moore was starting at 6,300, I would be all over David Moore. But apparently they don't know whether he's going to play or not. I guess he's suspended. A banned substance. But yeah, we don't know if he's going to play. It sounds like he's not going to play. So Richardson at 6,000, just because he's so cheap on a good Central Michigan team in a game that's supposed to be competitive and has a high total, I am interested in David Moore. As far as stacking options, they have 3 wide receivers who you can go to here. Khalil Pimpleton was the target hog on this team last year. I think with the returning guys in the MAC, he probably had the highest target share. I haven't fact-checked that, but it looks right. At 116 total targets, he did turn that into almost 900 yards. So he's going to get the most targets, PPR, especially cash games. He's very good at 6,500. As far as wide receivers, Ja'Cory Sullivan was their number 2 guy, but he also had over 800 yards. He wasn't very far behind Pimpleton from a production standpoint, even though he got a lot less targets. So Sullivan probably should not have that much of a price difference between Pimpleton. And then the third guy, Scott, he also saw a fair amount of targets. He saw 69 targets a year ago, and he also had 650 yards. So I think Scott at 4,500 is a fantastic value. As far as Ohio, they haven't said who their starting quarterback is going to be. And if they did have a clear starter, I would easily play either one of these guys. Either Curtis Rourke, at 5,900, or Amari Rogers, the UNLV transfer, at 5,700. Because, like I said, both these guys are very dangerous dual threats, I would think, in an offense that has been consistently, year in and year out, very friendly to fantasy quarterbacks, especially if they are a dual threat. But in this situation, where I think both guys might get snaps, I don't know who's going to play. They could break the slate. Amari Rogers could play and get 3 rushing touchdowns, and I wouldn't be that surprised. But so if I'm playing 150 lineups, maybe I have some of these guys, but I don't play 150 lineups. I've mentioned that before. If you haven't watched the podcast, I try to give you information that will help you, but I currently do not do that. As far as running back, they split the running backs carries. O'Shawn Allison, I think, is going to be the top guy. I guess he's questionable. I don't really have much information. I haven't looked into that to report on that, so I would check that before you play him. But they split carries, so I probably won't be playing either guy with all the good running backs. And then at wide receiver, they split the targets out more than any other team on the slate. So I wouldn't play anybody because there are some good cheap options. Unless I'm playing their tight end and I need salary saving options, salary relief. Ryan Luhrmann, the tight end at 3,900. This guy did see 360 yards a year ago, and I think he had something like 5 touchdowns. Pretty good production from a tight end. Not fantastic, but 3,900 could certainly return value. Let's move on. Ball State, Miami, Ohio. This is a good one, folks. I did bet on this game. I took Ball State. I grabbed them at +2. They opened +3.5. I would have hammered that. I think Ball State was one of the more underrated teams in the league last year, and I think Miami, Ohio was one of the more overrated teams in the league. Weird to say because Miami, Ohio did win the league. Like I said, random teams win this league every year. Miami, Ohio is not going to win the MAC this year, or I'd be shocked if they did. I do think they'll be better than they were last year, though, which is weird to say when they won the MAC. But were extremely lucky, and Ball State was extremely unlucky. From a statistic standpoint, Ball State actually had the best offense in the MAC last year. They were a balanced attack. They could run the ball, and they could throw the ball as well. So I will have a Ball State stack here or there. I wish they were a little cheaper, though. Their quarterback, I think, is more expensive than he deserves to be, Drew Plitt. But they do run the most plays, I believe, on the entire slate, plays per game. MAC teams usually run very slow. Let me try to fact check that. They run 77 per game. And yeah, that's the highest of the slate last year by about 3 plays per game. And they were efficient as well. Caleb Huntley at 6,700. This guy was a beast versus MAC competition last year. He averaged like 140 yards per game. Versus MAC teams. He was not effective in his other games against stiff competition, but he does not have stiff competition here. He's facing a fellow MAC opponent. So I like Caleb Huntley at 6,700. I like Plitt. I like Justin Hall. He's their clear number 1 option from a production standpoint, but he's a little more expensive than I would like. If you want to pay down, this guy Tyler, he is another good starting wide receiver option. Doesn't see as many targets, only saw 3.9 last year, as well as Davis saw 4.2, but all of these guys had over 500 yards. Davis, Tyler, and Hall. I do think Hall is the better option, but maybe a little expensive for my taste. I could still see a Ball State stack, maybe Plitt, Hall, and Huntley, or Plitt, Geiler, and Huntley if you want to go that option. Now, again, they're underdogs in this spot, and it has a game total of about 55.5, which isn't usually something you would stack. But again, I think this Ball State team is really underrated. They keep losing one-score games, and Miami, Ohio keeps winning one-score games. That's just not something that usually continues. Now, while you could say Miami, Ohio has been better coached, I do think they are well coached. I do think they will improve, given that they return some young guys. I just quite frankly think Ball State has the better offense. I think they are the better team. And sure, I'll take them in this spot. All right, as far as Miami, Ohio, I'm not going to have a ton of interest in them. It is worth mentioning that their starting running back is out, Bester, who did get a lot of rushing touchdowns last year. While he did have a lot of rushing touchdowns, when you look at his overall statistical profile, he had way more fantasy points than you would traditionally expect from what he was getting and the yardage he was putting up. So not super interested. I could see why you would have interest in Johnson at 5,200. He could return value. Again, I think there are a lot of really good running backs, and he is not quite there for me, but he is well within consideration. As far as Gabbard at 6,600, yes, he is the brother of the Gabbard you are thinking of. I actually think this guy's kind of good. He got some flack, but he played last year, and he was really young, and he improved as the year went on. So I actually think this guy's going to turn out to be a pretty darn good college quarterback. And I do think he is underrated. I think he's the best part of this team this year. But at the same time, don't have it pulled up in front of me, but his touchdown to interception ratio was something like 10-9, 11-9. He just was not a good fantasy quarterback last year. And until I see it from him, I'm not going to go there. So maybe later on this year or maybe next year. As far as from wide receiver standpoint, I do have some interest in Jack Sorensen. I do think he's going to be their clear number one guy this year. He did have about 568 yards. He came on towards the end of the year, and he does have some big playability. So at 5,200, he is in consideration. And they have my favorite punt play on the slate. Where are you? Burns. James Burns is listed as a starter on the depth chart. He is only 3,000. That is a mispricing. I love throwing him in there as a punt because him and Luerman are like pretty much the only really, really, really cheap guys. Only guys under 4,000 that I like. But anyway, yeah, mostly Ball State for me in that matchup. Bowling Green, no thank you. Bowling Green versus Toledo. I'm going to have no Bowling Green ownership. Personally, if you want Andrew Clare, I do think he's one of the better running backs in the MAC. But Bowling Green was absolutely futile last year. Just putrid at pretty much everything. So why would I target their offense? I don't know. They are 23.5-point dogs, and I don't hate that. They somehow beat Toledo last year, so Toledo at home is in a huge revenge spot here. I think they roll Bowling Green. I think Bowling Green stinks. Their offense was so bad last year, I don't even want to spend time on it. If you have interest in them, it would be because Toledo had a bad rushing defense last year, a bad defense overall. They allowed about 262 pass yards per game and 226 rush yards per game. But if you are 23.5-point dogs, I am not really going to look at you very much, especially at the running back position when that's your most talented player. All right, running back I think is in a smash spot here is Bryant Koback at 8,200. This guy had some big games and some bad games. This should be a big game for him. Going against a Bowling Green team that allowed they allowed 260 rush yards per game. 260 to opponents last year. That was near the bottom. I think it was at 117, somewhere in that range. Very near the very, very bottom of all of college football. So, of course, I'm going to have Bryant Koback. I think they're going to run the ball with extreme success. They do give this guy Seymour, Shaquille Seymour, carries as well. He had about 173 carries last year for 740 yards, so he is a pretty good backup at 500. But I do think there is a backup I like it better on the slate, which I forgot to mention. I will get to him in a second. As far as the Toledo stack, I don't hate that. I don't really like their quarterback options, and they haven't totally named a starter. But I think Eli Peters should start. But I'm not 100% confident in that, and even if there was, I don't know, I kind of like Crum and Ellaby a little bit better, maybe even Plitt. But, I don't hate a Toledo stack, so I think they're going to roll. But it's not a stack I like to target from the passing game, so I'm mostly just going to own Koback in all of my lineups and just kind of call it that. But if you're looking at one of their running backs, I think McKinley Lewis has the best price point at 5.4. He did lead this team in targets last year with 66. He had over 600 yards, so nothing crazy, but wouldn't be surprised if he returned value there. I think Mitchell is fine. He's too expensive, though, at 6,800. There's no reason he should be priced more. He had just a few more yards and less targets last year than McKinley Lewis. I'm not going to get desperate other than that. I don't think they spread the ball out quite enough for me to have interest in their other guys. All right, as far as the guy I forgot to mention, at running back, that would be for Buffalo, that would be Kevin Marks. This is the 2 running back system. While Patterson is the absolute stud, Marks went for over 1,000 yards last year. They're facing a team they're supposed to beat. They're 13.5-point favorites. They should run the ball a lot. They run the ball about 70% of the time. He had over 200 carries last year, about 80 yards per game. Why is Kevin Marks 4.5K? I don't know, fellas. Sure. If I can't fit a second quarterback in there, I'll fit Kevin Marks in the flex or in the super flex. So yeah, I really like Kevin Marks there. I even stacked Marks and Patterson a fair amount on the MACtion slate last year, and it just seemed like the pricing never caught up or something, and it was successful week after week after week, which was usually the prices get adjusted at some point. I don't know. I just kept doing it and it kept working. So I don't see why I wouldn't keep doing it here. I guess the only reason I wouldn't keep doing it here is because Patterson's so expensive I can't really afford it. But Marks is cheap, so maybe you can afford it. I don't know. I like Marks. All right. I think I went over pretty much everything. As far as a positional overview, I think Crum is the clear number 1 guy. I'm fine with Plitt, even though I do think he's a little bit overpriced. Peters is okay if you're going into Toledo game stack, but he may not even see a full game's worth of reps. I really like Ellaby in a Western Michigan stack. Gabbard at 6.6. Hutchinson and Richardson at 6K I do really like. So you could go a few ways. I think if you're going to play Crum, I'd probably pay down to Hutchinson or Richardson in the Superflex. If I'm doing a Ball State stack, I could have Plitt and then one of those 2 guys, or I could have Ellaby. I think Ellaby might be my more owned guy. I haven't really set all my lineups, but I'd like a Western Michigan stack with Ellaby. Where you go from there, I mean, it might be tough to fit Crum, but then you might put Marks in there and you can make things work. But I really like those quarterbacks. I think Ellaby's my favorite price-adjusted guy. And it's hard not to get Crum. In a game where there's not really a lot of quarterbacks with upsides, I think Crum has that upside. So while it's hard to justify paying up for him, I think he has that upside. As far as running backs, I mean, Patterson, if you can get to him, I'm not sure I will. I'll have a ton of Kovac, Lewis, and then from there, I'll be filling in my roster with one of Huntley, Tyler, like I said, maybe Johnson, maybe Claire, but yeah, and Kevin Marks. That's where I'm going to start my lineups, is with those running backs, Lewis, Kovac, Tyler, Marks, some variation of that. As far as wide receivers, I'm not really going to be paying up. I do think McCoy is the best option. I think Hall is fine. Pimpleton and Moore are fine. Williams and Nunn are fine. McKinley Lewis. I'm not really prioritizing any receivers, so I'm not going to go into all these guys in depth. I think if I'm prioritizing a Western Michigan stack, or if I think Eskridge is probably the best value at 4.4. So I might start with him, start with the stud running backs, and then see where I want to go from there with the best stacks. All right, folks, I hope that helped. I'm going to go ahead and end this. I will be back. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to record a video for the Thursday and Friday night slates. I will see if I can get to that tomorrow. And then I will have the Saturday video out when I can get to it. Other than that, time to go back to watching people be at each other's throats for this election results. Fun. All right, fellas, have a good one.